Hey, welcome everybody. This is Telentrix and my name is Daniel MacDonald. I'm here to talk a little bit about some of the work that I'm doing in the field of HR operations. And you can see a little bit more on my website where I like to write about different problems that we might be having in the HR profession and how we can be working with technology to make our lives a little bit better. I've posted a few videos actually along this topic, but today what I want to get into, when we look at the process between our applicant tracking system and then getting out different offers at various wages or in different countries, depending on different job roles, and then also how we create those records in Bamboo HR, which is our HRIS. So regardless of which applicant tracking system or HRIS we're talking about, what I want to show you today is when we take an action in Greenhouse, we might be creating an offer. Those details would go into Workato, which is our API integration tool. And I'll show you a little bit about how that works. And then in future episodes, I'll try to do little 5-10 minute bites. And then the next step, we can talk about how we are putting those files into Google Drive using an API in our Google Cloud to be updating documents. And then once the offer letter is accepted, we would put the candidate into Bamboo HRIS. So a few things that I want to take you through today, and then we're going to save some material for a little bit later, a deeper dive, is we're going to look at two tools called Workato and Greenhouse. And essentially what I want to do is I just want to create a simple webhook that is going to capture data coming out of Greenhouse into Workato. So for those of you who might be familiar with Greenhouse, it's an applicant tracking system. I don't want to spend too much time on the tracking system itself, but this is the tool that we're using, and so I wanted to demonstrate how we're creating webhooks and APIs as we are pushing out offers and then hiring people and moving those records into Bamboo. And so a lot of what you can see here is in the Dev Center under the configurations. So for those of you who are admins, you can go in here and you can see a lot about Harvest API, credential management, and webhook. Setting those up for Greenhouse. And so once you've done that and you've created a webhook for the action that you're trying to measure, you can then on the downstream end take that webhook and using API, you can actually get that information and upload it into another system. And that's what we're going to do today. So using Workato, we will go from Greenhouse and we're going to get that data ready for a document that we're going to create in Google Drive or HRIS. But like I said, I'm going to focus today here on the left-hand side. And we're going to take a look at Greenhouse and Workato and how do I create that webhook. So here I would go to webhooks in the Dev Center, right? And I want to create a new one. So essentially I can create a webhook for all sorts of different actions that might happen in my Greenhouse application. I actually want to see when a talent partner updates the offer, not necessarily sends it out, but they just update the details in the offer. I want to have that sent to a website, and then I'm going to pull that information down from that website, and I'm going to put it into a document. So first I'm going to name the webhook. I'm going to say web test, right? And then the question is, okay, how do I get this endpoint URL? And so that's going to come here from Workato. Actually, for those of you who don't know much about Workato, basically we're going to go through how do you set up a recipe, which is a low-code action. So it's as if you're developing a code for pulling the information out of one system and putting it into another one. And in this case, the action gets triggered by the webhook that we just created. And so if I were to go into this webhook, it's going to say new event via HTTP webhook, and I'm going to get started. Updated offer. And you'll see what it does is it gives me a website that I can actually put into Greenhouse as the endpoint. And I can also create some security, et cetera, create the webhook. And so, for instance, I'm going to use a different webhook for my examples, but in this case, it would create this new webhook, and I would have given it permission to see certain things. You can see that we've created other webhooks. And then over in the webhook library, I would actually be able to see all the different webhooks that are happening at different times across Greenhouse. And so we're going to take all of these things, we're going to include it to information that we have in Greenhouse about this applicant. And we're going to create a recipe in Workato that's going to take us through, pull that information out of Greenhouse. In this case, we're actually pulling from two sources. One is the offer that's been triggered in the webhook. Right, we can see that we use, for instance, the application ID out of the trigger for the next step, which is to get all of the information about the application out of Greenhouse. And we're going to get the candidate information, and we're going to get the offer letter information. We're going to turn those into different variables. And we're going to take a document out of Google Drive. We're going to save it as another document, and we're going to update it with the information. So for instance, here we see, replace today's date with the variable that we've created called offer date, which is up here. Something that's interesting about dates actually is you're going to have to look a little bit at what's the format of the date coming out of the source. So here you can see that actually I've had to create a formula that puts a string variable on the date and then presents it back in a certain way, because that's how I want to see it. So for instance, if I go to the one that just ran, we can see that it was successful. I created a document here with these variables, right? So you can see the JSON that ran on what was the date that it replaced it with. What's the title of the person? And we'll get into the next video. We'll get into actually how do we take these tokens and create a variable to replace them with. So with that, I'm going to leave it. We will have a session, probably another week or so. What I'll do is I'll take a look at how we work with the variables in Workato. How do we create the recipe? And then specifically, when we look at Google Drive and updating those documents or updating a new record in Bamboo, those are going to be the next steps once we have our hands on the trigger from Greenhouse. And so we can see that basically the action that's happening in Greenhouse would trigger a call and response from Workato. And then in the next workshops, we're going to look at what do we do with that information downstream. So thank you very much for joining, and look forward to seeing you next time.